The scorching New Mexico sun beat down on Matthew Harris's weathered face as he guided his horse through the rugged terrain outside Santa Fe. The year was 1875, and the once peaceful borderlands had transformed into a feverish maze of prospectors and treasure seekers after rumors of ancient gold spread through the territory. But Matthew wasn't like the others. His interest in the land went deeper than mere precious metals. As a farmer who had spent 15 years building relationships with the local Apache people, he understood the sacred significance of their ancestral grounds. The morning air carried an unusual tension as Matthew approached the hidden canyon where the Apache kept their most revered relics. Smoke rose in thin wisps against the crystalline sky. Not the familiar cooking fires he'd grown accustomed to seeing, but something more ominous. His horse, sensing his unease, nickered softly as they picked their way down the steep trail marked by ancient petroglyphs. In the distance, he could make out figures on horseback retreating from the area. A gang led by John Wright, a notorious claim jumper who'd been terrorizing the region. Matthew's stomach turned as he recognized the distinctive black hat and red bandana of the man who had threatened to clear out the savages just days before at the Saloon in Santa Fe. The sound of gunfire echoed off the canyon walls, spurring Matthew to urge his mount faster. What he found in the sacred grotto made his blood run cold. The ceremonial shrine, carefully maintained by generations of Apache holy men, was ablaze. Ancient tapestries and ritual objects crackled in the flames, while priceless pottery lay shattered on the ground. Without hesitation, Matthew dismounted and rushed toward the burning structure, knowing that irreplaceable pieces of history were moments from being lost forever. Inside the smoke-filled shrine, Matthew's eyes stung as he frantically gathered what he could salvage. His hands closed around smooth clay vessels, delicately woven baskets, and objects whose significance he could only guess at. A painted mask seemed to stare at him through the haze, its expression both mournful and accusing. He knew he was an intruder here, but leaving these treasures to burn felt like an even greater sacrilege. Just as the roof beams began to groan ominously, Matthew stumbled upon a hidden chamber beneath a loose flagstone. In the flickering firelight, gold glinted, not Spanish coins or prospectors' nuggets, but delicate ceremonial items crafted by ancient hands. His heart pounding, he carefully wrapped them in his coat and added them to his desperate rescue mission. The shrine's guardians were nowhere to be seen. He prayed they had escaped rather than fallen to Wright's gang. Grace Young, the widow who ran Santa Fe's general store, was the only person Matthew felt he could trust with his burden. As he rode into town with his precious cargo concealed, he spotted her sweeping the boardwalk outside her establishment. Her kind face showed immediate concern at his smoke-blackened appearance. "Matthew Harris, what trouble have you gotten yourself into now?" she called, but her voice held more worry than judgment. Inside the store's back room, Matthew carefully unwrapped his salvaged treasures while Grace stood watch at the window. "Wright's gang has gone too far this time," he explained, his voice rough from smoke. "These belong to the Apache. Sacred things, Grace. Things that were never meant for our eyes, let alone our hands. But I couldn't let them burn." The array of artifacts spread before them told a story of generations of spiritual practice and artistic mastery. David Lewis, the local banker, chose that moment to enter the store, catching them both off guard. His shrewd eyes took in the scene before him, lingering on the gold pieces with an unsettling intensity. "Quite a collection you've got there, Harris," he said slowly, making no move to leave. Matthew's hand instinctively moved toward his gun, but Grace stepped between them with the practiced diplomacy of a longtime frontier businesswoman. The tension in the room grew thick as David Lewis continued to stare at the rescued relics. Matthew knew the banker had financial ties to several mining operations in the territory, including some that had forcibly taken Apache lands. The question hung unspoken in the air. Would Lewis report them to the authorities, or worse, to Wright's gang? The future of these precious artifacts, and possibly their own lives, balanced on the edge of a knife. Grace moved with deliberate calm, pulling a worn leather ledger from beneath the counter. "Mr. Lewis, I trust you'll understand that these items are properly documented as historical artifacts under territorial protection," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "Matthew here has been working with the reservation elders to preserve their heritage." The lie came smoothly, born of necessity, though Matthew admired how Grace wove truth and fiction together. Lewis adjusted his silk vest, a gesture that seemed more nervous habit than sophistication. The banker's reputation for acquiring valuable properties through foreclosure was well known in Virginia City, but this situation clearly fell outside his usual sphere of influence. Interesting, he mused, reaching toward an intricately carved ceremonial bowl before Matthew subtly shifted to block his access. Though I wonder if the territorial authorities share your interpretation of ownership rights. A gust of wind rattled the shop's windows, carrying with it the scent of sage and approaching rain. The storm building over the mountains seemed to mirror the mounting pressure in the room. Matthew knew they needed to move these artifacts somewhere safer, and soon. The shrine's destruction would eventually be discovered, and questions would follow. "Tell me, Lewis," Matthew said carefully, "how's that investment in the Copper Creek mine working out? Heard there was some dispute about the claim's legitimacy." The implied threat hung in the air. If Lewis caused trouble over the Apache artifacts, his own questionable dealings might face unwanted scrutiny. The banker's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Grace busied herself wrapping the items in soft cloth, her movements precise and purposeful. "Victoria's expecting these pieces at the mission by sundown," she announced, naming the respected missionary who ran the school for native children outside town. Another calculated fiction, but one that provided legitimate cover for their activities. Lewis would think twice before challenging Victoria's moral authority in the community. Thunder rolled across the valley as Lewis finally stepped back from the counter. "Well, I suppose proper documentation changes things," he said slowly. "Though I'd hate to see such valuable pieces leave our community. Perhaps we could discuss an arrangement." The greed in his eyes hadn't diminished, but it was now tempered with calculation. Matthew felt his muscles unknot slightly, though he maintained his guard. "These aren't for sale, David. They're part of living history, not commodities to be traded." He began carefully packing the wrapped artifacts into a sturdy wooden crate, his movements deliberate and protective. The small golden figurines disappeared beneath layers of straw, their sacred significance far outweighing their material value. Grace produced a letter from her desk, the mission's letterhead clearly visible. "I've already arranged transport with Andrew's freight company. He'll be here within the hour." The mention of Andrew, whose wagons regularly carried supplies to the reservation under government contract, added another layer of legitimacy to their story. Lewis would find it difficult to interfere without raising questions about his own motives. The banker lingered a moment longer, then turned toward the door. "I'll be keeping an eye on this situation," he said, the words carrying both warning and promise. "Cultural preservation is everyone's concern, after all." The bell above the door chimed his departure, its cheerful sound at odds with the tension he left behind. Matthew waited until Lewis's footsteps faded before speaking. "We need to move everything tonight," he said quietly. "He'll be watching, but he won't risk direct confrontation yet, not with Victoria's name attached." Grace nodded, already reaching for paper to write a genuine letter to the missionary. They would need her help now, whether she knew the full truth or not. Outside, the storm finally broke, rain drumming against the roof as lightning split the sky. Matthew began preparing for the dangerous night ahead, knowing that Lewis wasn't the only threat they faced. Somewhere out there, Wright's gang was still searching for the lost shrine, and they wouldn't be satisfied with documentation or mission approval. The race to protect these sacred pieces had entered a new phase, and time was running short. The night air crackled with electricity as Matthew and Grace worked swiftly in the dim lamplight, wrapping each sacred artifact in soft deerskin before nestling them into wooden crates lined with straw. The pottery fragments and ceremonial items seemed to pulse with their own energy, as if responding to the urgency of the moment. Thunder rolled across the valley, providing cover for their clandestine activities. Grace's hands moved with practiced efficiency, her years of experience handling delicate museum pieces evident in every careful motion. "The cave system near Amarillo might be our best option," she whispered, securing a particularly fragile clay vessel. "Andrew keeps it well guarded, and Lewis wouldn't think to look that far east." Matthew nodded, though concern creased his weathered features. The journey would be treacherous, especially with Wright's gang prowling the territory. A floorboard creaked overhead, and both froze momentarily before recognizing Victoria's familiar footsteps. The missionary's niece had become an unexpected ally, using her aunt's reputation as a shield while helping them protect the artifacts. She descended the stairs carrying a bundle of maps, her dark hair still damp from the rain. "The stage to Santa Fe leaves at dawn," she reported. "We can use it as a decoy while you take the southern route." Matthew Harris wiped sweat from his brow as he carefully examined the ancient Apache arrowhead in his weathered hands. 3 months had passed since that fateful night when he'd rescued the sacred relics from the burning shrine, and word was starting to spread through Virginia City about his growing collection of native treasures. He knew it was only a matter of time before trouble came knocking. John Lewis, a ruthless prospector who'd made his fortune during the early gold rushes, had already paid 2 visits to Matthew's modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Each time, his offers to purchase the artifacts grew more aggressive, his thinly veiled threats more ominous. But Matthew had made a promise to the dying Apache elder that night. These treasures would never be sold or exploited. The late summer heat bore down mercilessly as Matthew worked to reinforce the hidden cellar beneath his barn, where he kept the most precious items. His wife Hannah helped him construct elaborate false walls and carefully cataloged each piece. She'd developed an almost mystical connection to the artifacts herself, often spending hours studying the intricate patterns and symbols that adorned the ancient pottery and ceremonial items. David Wright, the local banker, had been surprisingly supportive of Matthew's role as unofficial curator of the Apache treasures. He'd even offered to help establish a proper museum in Virginia City to house the collection. But Matthew remained wary. He'd seen how quickly gold fever could corrupt even the most upstanding citizens, and these relics carried value far beyond mere gold. The situation grew more complex when Michael Young arrived from Santa Fe, claiming to represent a consortium of wealthy collectors. His polished manners and generous offers couldn't mask the predatory gleam in his eyes. Matthew recognized the same dangerous greed he'd seen in countless prospectors during his years working claims in the territory. This was a man who wouldn't take no for an answer. Rebecca Lewis, John's wife, proved an unexpected ally. She secretly visited Matthew's farm one evening to warn him that her husband had assembled a group of hired guns, determined to seize the collection by force if necessary. The fear in her eyes told Matthew all he needed to know about the gravity of the threat. He began sleeping with a loaded rifle beside his bed. Grace King, the town's schoolteacher, helped Matthew document the stories and legends associated with each artifact. Her scholarly approach and genuine respect for Apache culture provided a welcome contrast to the growing atmosphere of tension and greed. Together, they worked to preserve not just the physical objects, but the rich heritage they represented. Andrew Harris, Matthew's younger brother, arrived from Laredo with troubling news. Word of the collection had spread far beyond Virginia City, attracting attention from wealthy collectors as far away as San Francisco and St. Louis. The vultures were circling, and Matthew knew his peaceful days as a simple farmer were numbered. Victoria Wright, the banker's daughter, began spending time at the farm, fascinated by Hannah's growing knowledge of Apache culture and healing practices. Through her social connections, Victoria learned that John Lewis and Michael Young had formed an alliance, pooling their resources to acquire the collection by any means necessary. The noose was tightening. The first serious attempt to steal the artifacts came on a moonless night in early autumn. Matthew's vigilance paid off when he spotted movement near the barn and raised the alarm before the thieves could breach the cellar's defenses. The would-be robbers fled into the darkness, leaving behind evidence linking them to Lewis's mining operation. Abigail Young, Michael's sister, arrived in Virginia City with an intriguing proposition. She claimed to represent a group of sympathetic scholars who wanted to protect the artifacts while making them accessible for study and appreciation. Her sincerity seemed genuine, but Matthew had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving in the lawless border territories. The situation reached a boiling point when John Lewis and his men surrounded the farm one afternoon, demanding Matthew surrender the collection. What they didn't know was that Hannah had already moved the most important pieces to a new hiding place, deep in a network of caves she'd discovered in the hills. Matthew faced down the threat with steady nerves, knowing the true treasures were safely hidden. As tensions escalated, David Wright revealed his own ulterior motives. The banker had been secretly negotiating with collectors in Amarillo, planning to seize the artifacts through legal manipulation of Matthew's mortgage. The betrayal stung, but Matthew had anticipated such schemes and taken precautions to protect his land rights. Hannah's connection to the artifacts deepened in unexpected ways. She began having vivid dreams filled with Apache symbols and ceremonies, dreams that led her to discover additional relics in locations she couldn't possibly have known about. The local Apache people took notice, and their attitude toward the Harris family shifted from suspicion to cautious respect. The arrival of a mysterious Apache elder named Whitehawk changed everything. He appeared at the farm one morning, explaining that he had been sent by his people to evaluate Matthew's stewardship of the sacred items. His presence added another layer of complexity to the already volatile situation, as both Lewis and Young sought to manipulate the tribal politics to their advantage. As Whitehawk settled into his role as observer, Matthew found himself walking a delicate line between respecting the elder's authority and protecting his family's interests. The Apache man's weathered face revealed little, but his eyes missed nothing as he examined how the artifacts were being stored in the converted root cellar beneath the barn, where Matthew had crafted special cedar shelves lined with soft deerskin. Hannah's dreams became more frequent and detailed, often featuring a towering mesa she'd never seen before. One morning, she sketched the formation with such precision that Whitehawk's typically stoic expression changed to one of astonishment. He explained that she had drawn the sacred Eagle Mesa, a place known only to initiated tribal members, located 3 days' ride south toward Santa Fe. The revelation sparked intense debate among the Apache about the meaning of her visions. Lewis and Young intensified their pressure, sending a letter threatening to expose Matthew's illegal possession of native artifacts to federal authorities in Amarillo. The implicit blackmail infuriated Matthew, but Whitehawk counseled patience, sharing ancient stories of how rash actions often led to unforeseen consequences. The elder's wisdom helped Matthew see beyond his immediate anger to recognize the deeper game being played. The situation grew more complex when Victoria, Lewis's wife, secretly visited the Harris farm. She revealed that her husband had discovered documents suggesting vast mineral deposits beneath the land where many of the artifacts had been found. His interest wasn't just in the relics. He believed Matthew's property sat atop a fortune in silver ore. The news cast all previous events in a different light. Whitehawk's presence attracted other Apache visitors, including a young warrior named Running Horse, who recognized several ceremonial items as belonging to his grandfather's clan. Instead of demanding their return, he shared stories of their significance, adding layers of meaning to objects Matthew had been protecting without fully understanding their importance. The knowledge felt like both a gift and a burden. During a fierce autumn storm, Hannah's most powerful vision yet drove her to lead Matthew and Whitehawk to a hidden canyon where they discovered a cache of ancient weapons and ceremonial items untouched for generations. The find strengthened the bond between the Harris family and the Apache, but also increased the risk from those who would exploit such treasures. Young responded to these developments by bringing in a team of surveyors who began working suspiciously close to Matthew's property lines. Their presence sparked tension with the Apache visitors, who recognized the age-old pattern of encroachment. Whitehawk warned that such actions could awaken forces beyond anyone's control, his words carrying weight with both natives and settlers who knew the region's violent history. The pressure culminated when Lewis attempted to bribe Whitehawk, offering him a substantial payment to declare the artifacts should be relocated to a museum in Amarillo. The elder's refusal was diplomatic but firm, though the attempt created ripples of discord among some tribal members who saw potential benefits in a more public display of their heritage. Matthew realized the battle for the artifact's future would be fought on multiple fronts. Hannah's connection to the relics took an unexpected turn when she began speaking phrases in the Apache language during her dream states, words she couldn't possibly have known. Whitehawk believed she had become a conduit for ancestral memories, a phenomenon his people had prophesied would occur during times of great change. This development added spiritual weight to what had begun as a simple act of preservation. As autumn deepened toward winter, tensions escalated further when young surveyors accidentally crossed onto Harris land, leading to a confrontation that nearly turned violent. Only Whitehawk's intervention prevented bloodshed, but the incident made clear that the peaceful resolution Matthew hoped for might not be possible. The artifacts and the land they were found on had become the center of a struggle that threatened to tear apart the delicate balance between cultures. The summer heat bore down mercilessly as Matthew Harris stood before the ancient shrine, his weathered hands trembling as he clutched the sacred Apache ceremonial mask to his chest. Word had spread through Virginia City about his discovery, and now a mob of gold-hungry prospectors led by John Lewis surrounded his farmstead, their greed visible in their wild eyes. The relics he'd saved from the fire 6 months ago had become the center of a dangerous obsession. Rebecca Young, the local school teacher who'd helped Matthew document and preserve the artifacts, positioned herself between him and the crowd. Her knowledge of Apache culture had been invaluable, but now her presence offered little protection against 30 armed men, convinced the relics would lead them to legendary gold deposits in the sacred mountains. "Those artifacts belong to everyone," John Lewis shouted, his voice carrying across the dusty yard. "The Apache themselves said the mask points the way to their ancient mines. You can't keep that knowledge to yourself, Harris." The crowd murmured in agreement, hands hovering near holsters. Matthew knew the old stories, how the intricate patterns on certain ceremonial objects supposedly mapped the locations of rich deposits. But he'd made a promise to the dying Apache elder. David Wright, the only lawman within 50 miles of this border territory, watched from horseback with obvious conflict in his expression. He'd been Matthew's friend for 20 years, but the pressure from wealthy mine owners in Santa Fe was becoming too much to ignore. They'd offered substantial rewards for anyone who could locate new gold deposits in the region. The tension shattered as Michael King, a notorious claim jumper from Amarillo, fired a warning shot into the air. "Enough talk. Hand over them artifacts or we'll take them by force." The crowd surged forward, but Rebecca's voice cut through the chaos. "Wait. The patterns aren't what you think. I've studied them. They're funeral rites, not treasure maps." Matthew's mind raced to his conversation with Grace Wright, David's wife, who'd warned him this morning about armed men gathering in town. She'd begged him to flee north, but he couldn't abandon his promise. The dying Apache elder had entrusted him with these sacred objects because he'd shown respect, had saved them from the flames without thought of profit. In the growing chaos, Andrew Young, Rebecca's brother and the local banker, emerged from the crowd. "I have a proposition," he shouted. "The bank will buy the artifacts for a fair price. They can be studied properly, benefiting everyone." But Matthew saw the greed in Andrew's eyes. He was just another wolf in different clothing. Victoria Harris, Matthew's daughter, appeared on the porch with her mother's old rifle. At 16, she had her mother's fire and her father's stubborn principles. "This is our land," she declared. "These relics were entrusted to us. Anyone who takes one step closer will answer to this." The rifle gleamed in the harsh sunlight. The sacred mask seemed to pulse with energy in Matthew's hands as memories flooded back. The burning shrine, the choking smoke, the old Apache's dying words about protecting the tribe's heritage. He'd sworn an oath that transcended mere gold. The artifacts weren't just relics. They were the heart of a people's spiritual identity. Hannah King, Michael's wife and the town's most respected midwife, pushed through the crowd. "Listen to me. My grandmother was Apache. These objects are sacred. There's a curse on those who would steal them." Her words carried weight as she'd never before revealed her heritage. The mob hesitated, superstition warring with greed. In that moment of uncertainty, Abigail Lewis, John's wife, broke ranks with her husband. "John, remember what happened to the Martinez family when they looted those graves last spring? All dead within a month." The crowd stirred uneasily, recalling the mysterious deaths that had plagued the grave robbers. Matthew saw his opportunity in their hesitation. "These artifacts will never leave my protection," he declared, "but I'll share something more valuable. The true story of why they were saved, what they really mean." He began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom, weaving a tale that held them spellbound. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, the mob's fury transformed into something else: understanding, respect, even shame. Matthew's words had touched something deep within them, awakening memories of their own sacred traditions, their own family histories of persecution and loss. David Wright finally dismounted, his decision made. "Anyone who threatens this farm or these artifacts will answer to me," he announced, standing beside Matthew. "Some things are worth more than gold. Some promises must be kept." The crowd began to disperse, changed by what they'd witnessed. That evening, as peace settled over the farm, Rebecca helped Matthew and Victoria carefully return the artifacts to their special sanctuary. "You knew all along there was no gold map," she said softly. Matthew nodded. The real treasure was in saving them, in keeping faith with those who came before. Notorious. The mask's ancient eyes seemed to glimmer with approval in the fading light. The night brought no rest for Matthew as he kept vigil over the artifacts, his mind racing with the weight of his responsibility. The sacred items seemed to pulse with an ancient energy in the moonlight filtering through the barn's weathered boards. He traced his fingers over the intricate patterns of the ceremonial mask, remembering the old Apache man who had entrusted him with these treasures on that fateful night of the fire. Rebecca appeared at dawn with coffee and fresh bread, finding Matthew still at his post. "You need to build something permanent," she said thoughtfully, surveying the makeshift storage area. "These pieces deserve a proper home." Her practical nature had always balanced Matthew's idealistic tendencies, and now her words sparked an idea that had been forming in his mind. Victoria arrived later that morning with architectural drawings she'd been working on through the night. Her sketches showed a small but secure building, designed to blend naturally into the landscape while protecting its precious contents. "We can use the natural cave formation behind the barn," she explained, "and build it so it looks like just another storage shed from the outside." Word of Matthew's stand against the mob had spread to neighboring communities, and unexpected allies began arriving at the farm. A group of skilled stonemasons from Virginia City offered their services, having heard the story from David Wright himself. They understood the importance of preserving history, regardless of its origin. The construction project became a community effort, with even former mob members contributing labor and materials. Matthew watched in amazement as the building took shape, its walls incorporating local stone and traditional Apache building techniques. The old medicine man's prophecy echoed in his memory. "The sacred things will choose their keeper, and through him they will bring healing." As summer turned to fall, the sanctuary neared completion. Rebecca had researched proper preservation methods, creating specialized display cases that would protect the artifacts from dust and moisture. Victoria's design included hidden ventilation systems and subtle security measures that wouldn't detract from the spiritual nature of the space. One evening, as Matthew supervised the placement of the final stones, a group of Apache elders arrived unannounced. They had traveled from their reservation after hearing about the preserved relics. Their presence brought a solemn gravity to the moment, their weathered faces showing both grief and gratitude as they examined the items their ancestors had created. The eldest of the visitors, a man whose face was mapped with deep wrinkles, placed his hand on Matthew's shoulder. "You have built more than walls," he said in carefully measured English. "You have built a bridge between peoples." These sacred things were not lost. They were waiting for this moment. David Wright, who had become a regular visitor and protector of the sanctuary, stood watching from the shadows. His transformation from skeptic to guardian reflected a larger change taking place in the territory. The gold fever that had driven men to violence was being tempered by a growing respect for the land's deeper treasures. That night, under a star-filled sky, the elders performed a blessing ceremony for the sanctuary. The sound of their ancient songs drifted across the farm, carrying with it the wisdom of generations. Matthew, Rebecca, and Victoria stood with the other witnesses, understanding that they had become part of something far greater than themselves. The artifacts seemed to come alive in their new home, each piece telling its story to those who came to learn. Matthew established careful protocols for visitors, ensuring that the sanctity of the space would be preserved. The sanctuary became a place of learning, healing, and reconciliation between cultures that had long been divided by fear and misunderstanding. As winter approached, bringing cool winds down from the mountains, Matthew often found himself sitting in the sanctuary's quiet interior. The mask that had started this journey now watched over a place of peace, its ancient eyes reflecting the light of understanding that had finally begun to shine in this corner of the border territory. Rebecca joined him one evening, her practical nature softened by the sacred atmosphere. "You've done something remarkable here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've shown that some treasures can't be measured in gold." Matthew nodded, knowing that the real wealth lay in the trust that had been placed in him, and the bridges that had been built between different worlds. The late autumn wind whipped across the barren plains outside Santa Fe as Matthew Harris stood before the tribal elders, his weathered hands trembling as he presented the rescued artifacts. The sacred objects gleamed in the firelight of the council lodge, their copper and turquoise surfaces reflecting dancing shadows on the adobe walls. 5 years had passed since that fateful night when he'd braved the inferno to save these precious relics. And now, the moment of truth had arrived. Rebecca Young, the local schoolteacher who'd helped Matthew document and preserve the artifacts, watched from the shadows with bated breath. She'd spent countless hours helping him catalog each piece, learning their significance from the few remaining Apache elders who would still speak of such things. Her presence here tonight was unprecedented, a white woman at a sacred tribal council, but her dedication had earned their grudging respect. The eldest of the council, a man whose face bore the deep lines of a century's wisdom, lifted the most significant piece, a ceremonial staff wrapped in lightning-struck wood and adorned with eagle feathers. John Wright, the territorial marshal who'd protected Matthew's sanctuary from gold-hungry thieves these past years, stood guard at the door, his presence a reminder of the delicate peace they'd forged between two worlds. David Lewis, the former prospector who'd first discovered gold traces near the original shrine site, sat in quiet contemplation. The revelation of the artifact's true worth had transformed him from a treasure seeker to their staunchest defender, though the change had cost him dearly among his former associates. The scars on his face from their retribution had healed, but the memories remained fresh. Victoria King, the Apache medicine woman who'd first recognized Matthew's pure intentions, moved forward to translate the elder's words. "The spirits have tested you," she began, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "For 5 cycles of the sun, you have guarded our people's heart. Now we must decide if these sacred things will remain in your care or return to their original keepers." The tension in the lodge was palpable as Michael Young, Rebecca's brother and the region's most respected silversmith, stepped forward. He'd spent months crafting special cases for the artifacts, combining traditional Apache designs with modern protection. His work represented the bridge they were all trying to build between their cultures, a testament to what could be achieved through mutual respect and understanding. Grace Wright, John's wife and the territory's only female doctor, watched the proceedings with keen interest. She'd treated Matthew's burns after the shrine fire, and over the years had come to understand the deeper healing these artifacts represented, not just for the Apache people, but for all who recognized their significance. Her medical practice now incorporated many traditional healing methods she'd learned from Victoria. The council's deliberations stretched through the night, each elder speaking in turn about the significance of this moment. They recounted the shrine's destruction, the threats from gold seekers, and Matthew's unwavering dedication. Hannah Lewis, David's wife who'd helped establish the sanctuary's garden with traditional Apache medicinal plants, served tea as the discussions continued. Andrew King, Victoria's grandson, and a bridge between the old ways and new, rose to speak last. His words echoed through the lodge. "My grandmother saw truth in this man's heart, when others saw only a stranger. These 5 years have proven her wisdom. The artifacts have transformed their keeper as much as he has protected them." The elders nodded solemnly at his observation. As dawn approached, the council reached their decision. The artifacts would remain in Matthew's care, but with a significant change, the sanctuary would now be officially recognized as Apache ground, with Matthew serving as its appointed guardian under tribal law. The announcement brought tears to Rebecca's eyes as she watched the man she'd grown to love accept this sacred responsibility with humble gratitude. The ceremony that followed merged traditions in ways never before seen in the territory. Abigail Harris, Matthew's sister who'd traveled from Virginia City for the occasion, witnessed the ancient blessings being bestowed upon her brother. The ritual smoke carried prayers skyward as the first rays of sunlight pierced the lodge's smoke hole, signaling a new day and a new chapter in their shared history. The implications of the council's decision rippled through the territory. Gold seekers would now face not only territorial law, but tribal justice if they threatened the sanctuary. John Wright's deputies would work alongside Apache warriors to patrol the borders, creating an unprecedented partnership that would serve as a model for other regions grappling with similar conflicts. As the gathering dispersed, Matthew and Rebecca walked the sanctuary's grounds, their fingers intertwined. The morning light caught the dew on the sacred plants Hannah had cultivated, creating a tapestry of sparkles that reminded them of the night sky. They stopped at the memorial stone marking the original shrine's location, both understanding that endings often contain the seeds of new beginnings. The story of the farmer who became keeper of Apache treasures would be told for generations, not as a tale of possession but of transformation. The gold that had driven so many to madness had been transcended by something far more precious: trust between peoples who had long viewed each other with suspicion. In the end, the real treasure wasn't the artifacts themselves, but the bridges they had helped build between two worlds. As winter settled over the border territory, the sanctuary flourished under the shared stewardship of Matthew's family and the Apache elders. The once contested relics now served as teaching tools, with Hannah leading classes for both settler and Apache children, sharing stories of how the artifacts connected to the land's ancient wisdom. The golden items that had once sparked such violence were displayed alongside everyday tools and ceremonial pieces, each telling part of a larger story of survival and adaptation. Rebecca had expanded her role beyond the sanctuary's walls, traveling between Virginia City and Santa Fe to advocate for similar preservation projects. Her reputation as a bridge builder grew, and soon other communities sought her counsel on navigating the delicate balance between progress and tradition. The skills she had learned from the Apache women in medicinal healing became particularly valuable, as she helped establish gardens of sacred plants in previously neglected areas. The transformation of the region didn't go unnoticed by authorities in Amarillo, who sent representatives to study the unique partnership. Matthew found himself hosting delegations from as far as Laredo, explaining how trust had replaced suspicion when both sides recognized their shared devotion to the land. The old shrine's ashes had indeed given birth to something far more valuable than gold, a template for cooperation that challenged decades of conflict. Deep winter evenings found Matthew and the Apache elders gathered around fires, sharing stories that would have been unthinkable months before. The children of both communities played together among the sanctuary's protected spaces, their laughter a testament to how quickly young hearts could overcome old prejudices. Even the most hardened skeptics found it difficult to deny the positive changes taking place. Hannah's garden had grown into a sprawling testament to persistence, with traditional Apache medicinal plants thriving alongside settler crops. She worked closely with tribal healers, documenting their knowledge in journals that would preserve their wisdom for future generations. The garden became a living classroom where both cultures learned from each other's agricultural practices, producing harvests more bountiful than either method alone could achieve. The sanctuary's success attracted unexpected allies. Traders passing through spread word of the peaceful cooperation, and soon artists and scholars made pilgrimages to document this unique experiment in cultural preservation. Matthew welcomed them all, understanding that each visitor carried away seeds of change that might take root in distant soils. The artifacts, once hidden in fear, now served as ambassadors of understanding. As spring approached, Rebecca organized a celebration that would become an annual tradition. Settlers and Apache families gathered to share meals, music, and stories, their children performing dances that borrowed freely from both cultures. The feast tables groaned under the weight of traditional foods from both communities, physical proof that there was room for all at the table of brotherhood. The original shrine's location, marked by the memorial stone, had become a place of quiet reflection. Visitors often left small tokens, flowers, stones, or handcrafted items, creating an evolving tribute to the power of preservation over destruction. Matthew sometimes stood there at dawn, remembering the night of the fire and marveling at how an act of desperate preservation had led to such profound change. Yet challenges remained. Not everyone embraced the new order, and Matthew maintained vigilance against those who still saw only gold's glitter. But the combined strength of settler and Apache defenders proved formidable, and would-be raiders learned to avoid the sanctuary's well-protected boundaries. The partnership that had begun in crisis had matured into a resilient alliance. Looking toward the future, Matthew and Rebecca began training the next generation of sanctuary keepers. Their own children grew up learning both English and Apache, equally at home in both worlds. The relics that had once symbolized division now served as teaching tools for a new way of living, where preservation of the past enriched the present and illuminated the path forward. As the story of the sanctuary spread, it became clear that the true gold of the territory lay not in metal or stone, but in the wisdom of those who chose to build bridges rather than walls. The farmer who had once rescued artifacts from flames had helped rescue something far more precious: the possibility of a future where different peoples could not just coexist, but thrive together in mutual respect and understanding.